Before I tell you about the text message that almost ended my marriage, before I explain why I sat alone in my parked car outside a grocery store for nearly 2 hours unable to stop crying, I need to ask you something. Have you ever felt guilty for wanting more from a life that already seemed good? Have you ever looked around at everything you worked so hard to build and still felt something missing? If you have, then you might understand what happened to me. My name is Emma, I'm 34 years old, and for most of my adult life I believed happiness was something you earned through responsibility. You worked hard, you stayed loyal, you made sensible decisions, you built a stable life. And eventually happiness would arrive as a reward, at least that's what I believed. From the outside, my life looked exactly the way I had imagined it would when I was younger. I was married to a good man. We owned a comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood. We had a golden retriever named Charlie. We took vacations twice a year, our bills were paid on time, our friends described us as the couple that had everything figured out. I smiled whenever they said it, but every time I smiled, a small voice inside me whispered the same question. Then why do you feel so empty? The strange thing about loneliness is that it doesn't always happen when you're alone. Sometimes it happens while you're sitting right beside someone. My husband Daniel wasn't a bad husband, that's what made everything so confusing. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't selfish, he wasn't unfaithful, he was dependable, reliable. Predictable. For years I thought those qualities were enough, maybe they should have been, but somewhere between mortgage payments, work deadlines, family gatherings, and endless routines, we had slowly stopped seeing each other. Not physically. Emotionally, every morning followed the same pattern. Coffee, work, dinner, television, sleep, repeat. Days became weeks, weeks became months, months became years, nothing was wrong, and somehow that became the problem. One evening I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was a picture of me at 23. I was standing on a beach wearing a ridiculous sun hat, laughing so hard that my eyes were closed. I stared at that girl for a long time. She looked alive, not happy, alive. There was a difference. I couldn't remember the last time I had laughed like that, not politely, not socially, really laughed. The realization unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. A few days later, something unexpected happened. My company sent me to a leadership conference in Chicago. 3 days, hundreds of professionals, networking sessions, workshops, panel discussions. Normally I would have dreaded it. This time I felt strangely excited. Maybe because it was different, maybe because it was away, maybe because I needed a reminder that I existed outside my routines. The conference hotel overlooked the river. The city lights reflected off the water every evening. For the first time in years I felt curious about life again. On the second day I met someone. His name was Noah. He wasn't exceptionally handsome, he wasn't wealthy, he wasn't even particularly charming. What made him different was the way he listened. Really listened. When people spoke, most waited for their turn to talk. Noah paid attention. I noticed it immediately. At first our conversations were completely innocent. Career goals, books, travel, life experiences. The kinds of conversations adults have every day, but there was something underneath them. Something I couldn't quite define. One afternoon during a networking event, he asked me a question nobody had asked in years. What excites you these days? I laughed awkwardly, not because it was funny, because I didn't know the answer. He smiled. That's okay, he said gently. Most people don't. The conversation stayed with me long after it ended. That night I called Daniel. We talked for 6 minutes. 3 of those minutes were about Charlie's vet appointment. After we hung up, I stared at my phone. 6 minutes, that was all we had to say to each other. The next day Noah and I ended up sitting together during a workshop. At lunch we talked again, then again during a break. Hours passed without effort. The conversation felt natural, easy, and that scared me because I couldn't remember the last time talking to someone felt easy. When the conference ended, we exchanged contact information, professionally. At least that's what I told myself. The first message arrived 2 days later. A funny article related to a workshop topic. I replied, then he responded, then I answered again. Nothing inappropriate, nothing secretive, nothing romantic. Yet something inside me knew I was standing near a dangerous edge. Weeks passed, the messages continued, sometimes about work, sometimes about life, sometimes about nothing important at all. What frightened me wasn't what we talked about. It was how much I looked forward to it. I started checking my phone more often, waiting for notifications, rereading conversations, smiling at messages. The realization hit me one Saturday afternoon. I was sitting beside Daniel on the couch. We were watching a movie. My phone vibrated. My heart reacted before my brain did. I knew immediately who it was. That terrified me. Because people don't anticipate messages that way unless they care, and caring was exactly what I had promised myself wasn't happening. That night I barely slept. I kept asking myself the same question. What are you doing? I wanted to believe it was harmless. Friendship, connection, conversation, but deep down I knew the truth. The problem wasn't Noah, the problem was what Noah represented. Attention, curiosity, interest. Parts of myself I thought had disappeared. A month later, Noah asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. He happened to be traveling near my city, just coffee. 1 hour, public place, nothing wrong with that, right? I spent 3 days debating. 3 days creating excuses. 3 days pretending I wasn't thinking about it, then I said yes. The coffee shop was crowded, bright, ordinary, safe. When I arrived, he stood and smiled. And for a moment I felt something I hadn't felt in years, anticipation. The conversation lasted nearly 3 hours, 3 hours that felt like 30 minutes. We talked about everything: dreams, regrets, fear, purpose, aging, marriage, life. When I finally stood to leave, neither of us moved immediately. The silence between us felt different, heavy, meaningful, dangerous. Then he said something that changed everything. "You deserve to be happy, Emma," such a simple sentence. Yet it struck me harder than it should have, because happiness had become something I discussed less and less. Responsibility had replaced it, obligation had replaced it, routine had replaced it. On the drive home I couldn't stop thinking about those words. You deserve to be happy. The question haunted me. What if I wasn't? What if this was all life would ever be? What if I woke up 10 years later feeling exactly the same? For the next several weeks my emotions became a battlefield. Part of me wanted distance, part of me wanted more, part of me wanted clarity, part of me wanted escape. Then came the text message, the one I mentioned earlier. The message that nearly destroyed everything. It arrived on a Tuesday evening. Daniel was in the shower, I was folding laundry, my phone buzzed, I looked down, it was Noah. The message read, "Have you ever wondered if you've settled for a life that no longer fits who you've become?" I stared at the screen. My chest tightened, because he wasn't asking about life, not really. He was asking about us, and for the first time I knew it. The line we had been approaching for months was finally in front of us. All I had to do was cross it. One reply, one decision, one moment. I could feel my heart racing. I walked into the kitchen, then into the living room, then back again. The message remained open, waiting. 100 different responses entered my mind. Then I heard the shower turn off upstairs, and suddenly something happened. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just honest. I imagined Daniel 10 years earlier, standing at the altar, nervous, hopeful, looking at me as if I were the best thing that had ever happened to him. I remembered our first apartment, our struggles, our victories, the nights we stayed awake planning our future, the dreams we built together, and I realized something painful. I had spent months blaming my marriage for problems I had never fully discussed. I had shared my fears with Noah, but not with my husband. I had shared my loneliness with Noah, but not with my husband. I had shared my dreams with Noah, but not with my husband. The betrayal wasn't physical, the betrayal was emotional, and it had already begun. Tears filled my eyes. For the first time in months, I saw the situation clearly. Noah wasn't saving me. He was simply receiving the version of me that Daniel no longer had access to, not because Daniel didn't care, because I had stopped letting him in. My hands trembled as I typed, then I sent a single message. "I think we've become something that threatens something important to me. I wish you the best, but this has to end." A few minutes later, he replied, "I understand." That was the last message we ever exchanged. I blocked the number, deleted the conversation. Then I sat alone in my car outside a grocery store and cried harder than I had cried in years, not because I lost Noah. Because I finally understood what I was actually grieving. I wasn't grieving a person. I was grieving the version of myself I thought I had lost. When I arrived home, Daniel was making dinner. He smiled when he saw me, a normal smile. A familiar smile, the kind I had stopped noticing, and suddenly I couldn't carry the weight anymore. "I need to tell you something," I said. Fear flashed across his face. We sat at the kitchen table. And for the next 2 hours I told the truth, not every detail, not every message, but the truth. I told him I felt disconnected, lonely, lost, unseen. I told him I wasn't sure when it started. I told him I missed us. When I finally finished speaking, the room became silent. Daniel looked down at his hands, then he said something I'll never forget. "I thought you were happy." 4 words, that's all, 4 words that broke my heart. Because I realized he wasn't ignoring my pain. He genuinely didn't know it existed. I had become so good at pretending everything was fine that even the person closest to me believed it. That conversation changed everything. Not overnight, not magically. Real change rarely works that way. The months that followed were messy, awkward, honest, sometimes painful. We argued, we cried, we talked, really talked for the first time in years. We started taking evening walks, we put our phones away during dinner, we planned weekend adventures, small things, simple things, intentional things, and slowly something beautiful happened. We found each other again, not the younger versions. Not the idealized versions, the real versions, the tired versions, the imperfect versions, the human versions. Last month we celebrated our 12th wedding anniversary. We weren't standing on a beach, we weren't in some luxury resort. We were sitting on our back porch eating takeout food while Charlie slept beside us. At one point Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand. No speech, no grand gesture, just a small squeeze. And somehow that tiny moment meant more than all the excitement I once thought I was missing, because excitement comes and goes, validation comes and goes, attention comes and goes. But choosing someone repeatedly, especially after you've seen their flaws and they have seen yours, that's a different kind of love, a deeper kind. If I could speak to the version of myself who almost confused attention with happiness, I would tell her this. Being seen by someone new can feel powerful, but before you run towards something new, ask yourself whether you've truly shown yourself to the people who already love you. Sometimes the life you're searching for isn't somewhere else. Sometimes it's buried beneath conversations you've been avoiding, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't leave. It's stay long enough to tell the truth, stay long enough to listen, stay long enough to rebuild. Because not every crack means something is broken beyond repair. Sometimes it simply means something important needs attention. And attention, when given with honesty and love, can save things you thought were already lost. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, remember this: the most dangerous temptation isn't always another person. Sometimes it's the belief that happiness exists everywhere except where you are. And that belief has the power to make you overlook the very things worth fighting for.